Professor Walid Mahdi isn't your average film buff. Over the last 5 years, the American study PhD, he has watched more than 500 films made in the United States and Egypt, searching for clues about how the two societies view Arab Americans. Films have the power both to reflect and to shape popular perception. Mahdi explained, they reveal a lot about how society view each other and themselves. I like and themselves. We know how Hollywood depicts the Arabs, and they kind of devoid of any humanity and one dimension, barbaric, savage, not trustworthy, and all of that. It's coming. I think it's seeping into a for Orientalist view. But
True.
let's start with the. You looked at the Egyptian film. This is very interesting. I'm interested to find out how the Egyptian film portray Arab Americans as opposed to American film.
There are so many reasons why I picked Egypt in particular. In one way, Egyptian cinema has a very historical presence in the region. It's been there since the very beginning of the 20th century. One of the earliest cinemas in the Middle East, and one of one of the ones that has a very good recognized presence in the region as well. There are more than 4,000 films produced so far, as opposed to other poor cinemas elsewhere in the region. But another reason why I chose Egyptian cinema is that because Egyptians has, especially when it comes to works related to the West, have Egyptian directors and writers have come up with a very interesting formula. And in that formula, they consolidated their state nationalist, that is Egyptian, critique, along with a pan-Arabist as well as Islamist critique of the West. So they found a way to consolidate the state nationalist, the Arabist, or the Arab nationalist, and the Islamist in a weird formula that enabled the directors and the writers to critique the West in a way that made sense to many Arabs and Muslims. And of course, there is the history and the presence of films and actual works that do criticize the industry. And at the same time, Egyptian cinema has hosted a number of Arab directors and actors that enable them again to produce their own thoughts and reflections, and in a way add their own meanings to the criticisms laid within these works. Yeah, well, when it comes to Egyptian cinema's treatments of Islamists in general, I mean, there are so many films, but let's say Adil Imam, you have Al-Irhab al-Kebab, you have Al-Irhabi. These are two big films, really, that for the first time sensationalized, not first time, but they did capitalize a rising fear that was propagated by the Mubarak regime in the aftermath of the assassination of the Sadat, and the rise of Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah as a viable threat to the society, and what has happened during the 90s, attacking the tourists. There was a rising fear of an alternative that is more violent, more viably, in a way, capable of producing a rallying cry from the public around it. So what happened is these films produced or made it possible for people to in a way, imagine what would Muslim Brotherhood, in essence, bring to the table. Mm-hmm. What we see, the images produced here, is that one of very superficial individuals who only care about al-madahir, appearances. They are reading Islam or hijacking Islam. They are not capable of dealing with the complexity of the society. They are takfiriyin. They all immediately render judgments of whether this is a Muslim or not. On others, they claimed Islam and they wanted to police people's allegiances around Islam their own way, of course. Now, if you compare that to Hollywood, Hollywood's treatment of the Islamists is very, very reductive and very one-dimensional and very, very superficial. The character is devoid of all the complexity that he is to be associated with, and he is reduced to just a beard and in the name of Allah, I'm gonna kill you all.
Why they always the Arab terrorists is missing one tooth and
right? Because there's again, the more ugly, the more vile,
yeah.
the evil is. I mean, the person is. the more you confirm that they're evil, because there is that
Are you?
prototype in Hollywood that you have, in order to be evil, you have to look ugly. That's how it is. But actually, by the way, Egyptian cinema still treated the Islamist in a more complicated way than Hollywood's.
I see.
At the end of the day, for Egyptian filmmakers, the Muslim, this Islamist or this terrorist is still a product of the socio-economic
I see.
environment.
Yeah.
He is a product of radicalization. There is the recognition of Islam as a religion that transcends terrorism, as opposed to Hollywood. So,
I was going to ask you about what is the role of the audience that
yeah.
consume this stereotyping in making all of this. I know there are some conspiracy theories said this is, kind of masterminded by the Jewish lobby or
Yeah.
people anti-Arab, whatever racism, whatever. But it's still an industry. It's still a business, and you need to make
Sure.
money, and you need to make find an audience. So it seems like it's been watched by millions of Americans.
Well, there are two things I want to highlight here. One is there is a disparity between what people want and what Hollywood is offering, in a way. There is a study on diversity done by UCLA, and that's it's a lot around Hollywood diversity, and in what ways do they offer diversity in their lead roles, of course. And they did compare, they pulled the audience, and they saw there is a big disparity between what people needed more diversity, asked for more diversity, but what they are getting are less and less, homogenous readings and images, of course. But at the same time, another point I want to add is that when it comes to imagining Arabs and Muslims in particular, of course, the cinema seems to be reflecting as well as influencing what people are getting from other images that they're getting of Arabs from media, from news. I mean, generally, especially since the 70s, what we have been getting from the Middle East here is more and more violence and more incidents that are, in a way or another, projecting Arabs as a viable threat to the United States security. But if you go when we think of the Jewish lobby, I mean, there is a conspiracy theory around it. Of course, Jews cannot control the whole medium, because Hollywood is a very diverse place still, even though it projects very homogeneous images. I mean, it's still a very diverse place. You have many people work with there. I mean, I know a lot of Arabs and Muslims work there too, who I interviewed personally when I went there. What happened is during the 70s, there was a body of Israeli producers who were, I don't know if you remember works produced by Canon Corporation.
Yeah.
That particular company, it's an Israeli company that produced images of Arabs as the threat to the Israeli-American kind of alliance against evil. And those films constitute the premise of what American filmmakers have been working with since the 70s, at least. Now what you find yourself with is, again, now a formula that in a way makes sense to the audience, because what they have been getting from the Middle East is more violence and more wars, regardless of the complexity of those wars, why they exist to begin with, to what extent America is playing a role in feeding them. There is no much, people don't ask much about that. They're only getting the images, and the cinema seems to be feeding that in a way or another, of course.
Somebody went as far as saying how the Nazi depicting the Jew during, Nazi did in Germany. But here, Hollywood also notoriously depicting other minority. This is, racism and xenophobia is as old as apple pie.
Sure.
So how they depict Native American, how they depict African American, depict the German, Italian, or is depicting Arabic any different in that context?
In a way, it's the same in the sense that what is being produced is not much about the minorities as much as about the producers themselves, because there is a collective image about America that in order to affirm that sense of Americanness, you have to produce evils around it. And those evils, the others, basically, be they Arabs, Jews, depending on what historical era we're talking about.
What country we bombed?
or country you want, right? But I think the only difference when it comes to the Arab image is the continuity. You know, that it has been for more than a century, continuously. We as a group, we've been continuously projected as the evil in so many ways.
Mhm.
And if you go prior to the 20th century, that was not just, you will realize that was not just a Hollywood thing. You know, you will see it in art, you will see it in literature, you will see it in travel
Yeah,
works. You will see it in so many ways
yeah,
that you say, wait a minute, you know. It's Orientalism as its best, of course. You know, it's up to the Arab and Muslim bodies here in the United States to rise to the challenge and seriously address those images as other minorities did. But until we are met with that serious voice and challenge, the works will continue to produce images of Arabs as a threat. But the dynamics of representations that underline what happens to the Arabs is are pretty much the same as ones done to the Native Americans, African Americans, and of course the Soviets and communists. And of course the images are different, and every community has its own fair share of denigrating images, but the premise is still the same. You know, that
uh,
these are not less these communities are not entitled to lead because they are producing all these negative energies around us that we ought to confront as Americans.
is there a serious attempt from Arab American producer or filmmakers you can think of?
Yeah,
Somebody was giving me a name, Sayyid Badriya, was an Egyptian.
صحيح.
Yeah, have you met? What do we
Yeah,
know about Sayyid?
I talked to Said Bidia. He's a very interesting guy. I mean, this guy worked in Hollywood for 20 years
As what?
as as a terrorist, basically. You know. I mean, for 20 years in CNN interview, he said,
Yeah,
I would get this one line that in
yeah.
the name of Allah, I kill you, you know, to the extent that his kids complained, you know,
It's
the
like
same.
Ahmad the terrorist at the puppeteering. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. Remember him? Except Ahmed, yeah, exactly. But except that he was seriously playing it, and that's the role he was getting. And his kids were complaining, you know, when are you going to play the right, the hero, you know,
Yeah.
the right dude, you know, in a way or another, you know. And this was, I mean, but the good news is that Said Badriya, Hisham Isawi is an Egyptian American director, and Tony Shalhoub, they got together back in 2007, and I met Hisham Isawi, the director, and produced a film called American East. And directors to reclaim the narrative and offer Arab Americans like Sayyid Badriya. By the way, he was the lead character in that film.
It's not a terrorist anymore.
Yeah, to offer folks who've been marginalized for decades in the
Yeah.
industry that very opportunity to, you know, take a serious role and go with it. And
Yeah.
ever since then, Said Badriya has got many interesting roles, mostly in independent films, of course.
Yeah.
But he made it, you know, in a way or another.
Uh-huh.
And since then, other Arab American directors like Sharon Davis, she produced Amrika film in 2008 called Amrika.
Hmm.
You have a 2012 film called Detroit Unleaded. You have The Citizen, film called Citizen by a Syrian American director. Khalid al-Nabawi is a leading character there.
Hmm.
So there is all of a sudden a chance for Arab American directors to create a space that invite not only Arab American actors but Arab diasporic actors like Egyptian actors who come from Egyptian cinema, but they find themselves in diaspora working beyond Egypt. They for the first time they are finding a space for them to produce their own narratives.
In the Twin City, we get the International Film Festival, three
Yeah, you have
weeks of
Mizna.
tremendous film, and then we have the Arab Festival by Mizna.
True.
And do you think also, as a diaspora ourselves, we stereotype about ourselves? Like you find certain films come to those festivals, like an international film festival, usually the film from the Middle East or about Arab or Islam, abused women or terrorism, and so the festival themselves, they are doing the betting for. I mean, even we think independent, and you think people are more doesn't have the pressure of commercialization. But there is another stereotyping within those festivals.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. So, in a way, stereotype is there for a reason. The reason why stereotypes continue is that they are partly, in a way or another, in a direct or indirect way, that do touch upon some parts of reality. So, stereotypes do not exist in a vacuum, you know.
I
So, they
see.
do bear some relevance to fact. The problem is when they become when they replace facts, then that
The
becomes a very
reality.
dangerous effect. When they replace reality,
That's
then that
very
becomes a
very
dangerous
good
thing, you
point. I
know.
like that.
Yeah, and it's not so much about contesting the stereotypes themselves as much as we contest the people's consumption of them without criticizing them, you know,
Uh-huh.
without challenging them, without contesting them. I mean, it's impossible. It's almost impossible to think of cinema that operate without stereotypes, you know,
Mhm.
because in a way or another, you need images, and those images are derived from history and cultural narratives. But the problem is when you 100% all the time rely on those stereotypes to allow you to, in your search to understand the other, then that creates a disaster. And
But
that's again the core of our take with Hollywood or Egyptian cinema or those films done by Arab American indies, you know, in general, is that to what extent can you balance the stereotype with serious perspectives that offer us an idea about the complexity of the world out there that we're set to portray, you know?
said the Egyptian film, it can describe Arab American either as someone who is still connected to his culture roots, still speaks Arabic, still value Arabic code of honor, and still is critical of American foreign policy. That's one camp. The other camp are just they give up on their own identity and kind of identify themselves with America and I noticed some I can see where you're going with this. I know some people, uh, to be an American, they have to make sure and get out of their way to condemn their own identity, to condemn their own culture. So take
Sure.
us through those two camps.
Well, so in general, Egyptian cinema, it's a third world cinema, and third world cinemas are supposed to carry a project, and that project is to dismantle mainstream projections, you know, of Hollywood in general, because Hollywood is considered in a way or another a reflection of U.S. cultural imperialism in the world, in a way, much
Mm-hmm.
less in the region. So what Egyptian filmmakers, as the representatives of the third world cinema, post-colonial cinema, they're trying to do is to retake the narrative and undermine those mainstream projections that Hollywood are offering. The problem is that in their disruptions of Hollywood's narratives, Egyptian filmmakers are reproducing the same kind of binary, you know, that they are criticizing. So what we end up having is, rather than having a very complicated way of addressing the Arab American
Authentic and original.
exactly complexity, diversity of concerns, issues, stands, positions. What we end up dealing with is basically a mainstream Arab narrative of what constitutes an Arab versus an American kind of identity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So in their rejections of Hollywood's negative constructions of the Arab and the Arab American image, what Egyptian filmmakers have done is that take the critique that circulate the Arab world, whether it's carried out by Arab nationalists or state nationalists or Islamists against America, and codify that critique in their projections, of course. Now, who is paying the price? The Arab Americans, of course, pay the price because they're only projected as either American or Arab, simply.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to see Arab Americans portrayed as Arab Americans. They are either, again, portrayed as Arabs, and with that comes all positive things, all the good qualities,
Or rejecting America.
acts of chivalry, generosity, shahama,
Yeah.
nakhwa, awlad al-balad, all these great qualities that only Arabs seem to carry, you know,
Yeah, I know.
and all the negative things that America stand for,
I
you know,
see.
whether foreign policy wise or even cultural, you know, degeneration or the materialist thinking. There are a number of ways. It's not just always foreign policy. There are a number of elements that films have criticized America through, and again, embodied those rejected Arab Americans through those images again.
Films as a medium, how is it different than like television or school or church or the other? I mean, the other institution in society also spout the same stereotypes. But in film, it's a little bit different.
So with films as a medium themselves is their ability to transcend location, and certain communities. Films are capable of going beyond the border. I mean, if Egyptian films are not Egyptian films; they are Arab films.
Mm-hmm.
People consume them no matter where they are, whether they live in the Arab world, anywhere in 22 countries, or maybe more now or less. Or if they live in the West or diaspora in general, they do consume these works. Again, films have another added advantage that do not exist in other works of art in general, and this is the question of accessibility. You don't have to be educated. You don't have to be elite in a way to understand the film, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can just watch it and get the gist of it. I remember in Yemen we used to watch, and a lot of illiterate folks in Yemen, they used to watch Bollywood films without even knowing a word, without even reading the subtitles, just going and trying to understand the
dancing and just
exactly. So the same thing happens whether with Egyptian cinema or Hollywood, is that films circulate worldwide freely. At the same time, they do not require the audience to have certain level of education to be able to access them. So they are easily accessible regardless of your religion, regardless of your nationality, and regardless of your identity. And in America in particular, they do serve as an educational tool. A lot of Americans do take films as an educational resource for them to understand.
Entertainment?
Well, entertainment is almost the first reason, of course, You always watch a film to have fun. But some people do take these films as educational, informative ways of learning about history or the world around them. Again, because of that sense of insulation that Americans live in,
How Arabs stereotype among themselves, because I grew up in the 60s and I saw all these Egyptian films that the protagonist, the bottle, he's a very solid, decent student, or somebody's doing the right things, have great values that match the mainstream, but the plot needed this protagonist to be corrupt, so to have a conflict. Mm-hmm. He cannot be corrupted in Cairo. They have to send him to Lebanon, and then he's been there a few months or year. And then he comes back drinking, womanizing. So we have our own stereotyping of Lebanon. This is a place where you go do the things you cannot do in Egypt and all. This is something I see it repeatedly in some of the
exist even before the film and popular culture, because again, we have various diverse communities that exist in the Middle East, in the Arab world, let's say, in particular, and those communities have responded to certain post-colonial nationalist projects. Now, all of a sudden, in the 60s, Egyptians are being taught to consider themselves as Egyptians, and Syrians same way. And now you have Gulf area, you have Saudis, Kuwaitis emerging, and I mean everybody started in a way or another rallying around their own nationalist identity. And part of nationalization is that it produces certain collective identities, and it thrives. This production thrives on portraying of others in certain lights and in certain stereotypes. So definitely there have been many stereotypes existing. In Egyptian cinema in particular, for example, you would see that happening not only, I mean, the Khaliji rich guy, almost no cabaret scene or club scene is there without an image of a Khaliji in there, someone dressing in a Khaliji style.
Almost like Hollywood here, rich and nice.
In a way that instantly reminds us of Hollywood. But that's not just the case with nationalities in Egyptian cinema. If you look at it, even within the Egyptian society itself, how the Saidi is portrayed, how the Nubi is portrayed,
exactly.
What are the Sudanese, what type of roles are they getting in the cinema. So even within Egypt itself, you would see an interesting way for stereotypes, interesting space for stereotypes to thrive. Now, that's not an Egyptian thing. Again,
No.
it's a human thing in a way or
And
another.
it's also, isn't it part of communication, because you use preconceived image like words to communicate something much easier. And it's some like oversimplification to communicate something, and there's just a part of them, the agenda itself,
And,
the level
and
of it.
exactly, and that's the biggest problem. Is that again that cinemas or films, let's say in Egyptian films, for example, they need binaries. You're right. In order to explain war, you have to have binaries that simplify things, and
Yeah.
those, in order to simplify, you need stereotypes, and well, you get it, But again, the sociopolitics changed our reading of things. It wasn't until the 80s that all of a sudden Christians have made it to the Egyptian screen.
Yeah.
Before then, there was less and less engagement with the Christian community. Post 80s, there was more, all of a sudden, an interest in recognizing and depicting the Christian Egyptians as part of the society,
Yeah,
and
mainstream.
as part of the mainstream, and
Yeah, you're
complicating
right.
their society and image and all that. So and that this is again a reason, because it's a product of a state-sponsored expectation of of where we want our society to be heading, what direction we want to in society, for the society to be heading. So again, sociopolitics change our images in so many ways, and I'm sure that time and politics change our views all the time. Not only Egyptian cinema, that always now with the thriving
Yeah.
Khaliji cinema and everywhere else.
Yeah. We'll see a different, another project where we can enlighten ourselves about complexity of presentation of Arab and Muslim in the media. And you're talking about your research. You are now in George Mason University, and this is your field, and you're working on it, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk to you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting me.
Well, thank you.